Hello everyone, and welcome to the Meet Melbourne Graduate Webinar Series. Thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar brought to you by the Melbourne School of Design, where we will be discussing how to improve your design portfolio. My name's Caitlin, and I'm from the recruitment and selection team at Melbourne School of Design. I'm joined by Professor Donald Bates, Chair of Architectural Design, and Nivedita, one of our current Master of Urban Design students. Tonight, Professor Bates will explain what a design portfolio is, why it is such an important element of your application, and he'll go through some do's and don'ts to help you produce the best representation of who you are as a designer. We'll also hear from Nivedita about her portfolio and her experience so far as an urban design student. And finally, we'll have some time at the end for some questions for our panelists. We also have Jess and Fabian helping us out on the live chat function tonight. So if you have a question throughout the presentation, please feel free to type it in as you think of it, and we'll do our best to answer. Please don't wait until the very end of the session, as we may run out of time to get to all your questions. So thank you again for joining us. And now I'll hand over to Professor Bates.
Thank you, Caitlin, and welcome to everybody for tuning in to this information session. Hopefully we can give you a good overview, particularly in terms of the submission of a design portfolio for your application to the Melbourne School of Design and particularly the Master of Architecture program, but also perhaps a little bit of a background with some other aspects as well. So we've got a lot of information to cover, so we'll go through fairly quickly and get started. There are 4 programs within the MSD that require submission of design portfolio: the Master of Architecture, the Master of Architectural Engineering, Master of Landscape Architecture, and the Master of Urban Design program. And we also have 2 sort of streams within that. We have what we call our 300-point stream and our 200-point stream. The 300-point stream is for students who have an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree, but it's not in a cognate area. That is to say, it's not within a study of architecture or architectural design. And with that, students can come in and effectively do 1 extra year, the first year, to get up to speed with those who have done an undergraduate degree in architecture. That's where the 200-point stream comes in. And the 200-point stream is for those who have done an undergraduate degree in architecture, for instance, and that covers for 2 years, 4 semesters. And so the 300-point stream, which is 2 semesters or 1 year, when they complete the first year, then you join the 200-point system and complete at the same time. Both streams for the Master of Architecture require portfolio submission. However, the submissions are different because we acknowledge the difference between having an undergraduate degree from an architectural program and having an undergraduate degree that may have nothing to do with architecture whatsoever. And you'll note that students applying for the 300-point stream of the Master of Landscape Architecture are only required to submit a portfolio if they have a design background. What is a design portfolio? Well, a design portfolio is a project in its own right. That is to say, this is not just gathering up things that you've already done and sending it off. You actually have to construct it. You have to produce it. You have to make sure it's telling the very best story about you, your assets in terms of the design work that you've done, the skills, showing the range of skills that you have through different techniques and different technologies. And it also really shows how you think as a designer. So you really need to treat this not just as gathering up previous projects and just putting them together in a package, sending it off, but actually treat it as a project in its very own right. In terms of it, it needs to have a cover sheet, which is important. You can have a page with a CV. It's not mandatory, and I'll show you examples where that has been done and how useful that can be. It's really important that when you show the different projects, and as it says in the next point, we expect to see 3 to 4 projects. Could be a bit more, certainly not less than 3 projects. Just depends on how they're arranged. But when you describe the start of a new project, each project page should and must include when it was done, that is to say, which semester or which term of what year, and of what level of study, first year, second year, third year, so on and so forth. Whether it was done by you as an individual or it was done as part of a group, and you should indicate what role you had within that. and also to indicate where it is in fact academic work or where it could be professional work that you've done within an office. But in either case, particularly also with professional work, you need to indicate what role you had in the production of that work. As I said before, it should be about 3 to 4 projects, could be 5, could possibly be 6, but you're limited to a maximum of 20 single pages. So therefore, you need to be quite smart about how you put it together. You can have a page that shows other work like photography or drawing or other things you've done, but it's not mandatory. And remember, that's one of the pages. So if you put that in, it means you have one less page for some of the other projects. So specific requirements are that it's a maximum number of 20 pages. It needs to be saved all together as one PDF file in landscape format. And the pages should be single landscape. We don't want a double spread page because by the time it shows up on our screens, all the work is very small and it's almost impossible to read. The total file size of this one PDF file should not exceed 10 megabytes. Again, you should show 3 or 4 projects, and that gives you about 4 pages or so per project. The images should be very high resolution and clearly labeled with captions and attributions to when they were done and such. We really want you to focus on individual work. Now, it may well be that some of your projects were done as part of a group. That's understandable, but at the same time, we need to understand what you have done. With group work, there's always a question of who really did the work and what aspect and what component of it was done. So we need information on that. And we prefer to have no more than a maximum of 1 professional or work experience project in the portfolio. That is, unless you've been out of school for more than 5 years. And then, of course, most of your work will have been done possibly in offices. But again, it's really important that you're quite explicit about what role you had and what aspect of the image that you're showing and what role you had in the production of that. This is the assessment matrix. This is how we review the projects. These are the criteria that we use when we give scores for a portfolio. So there are 3 basic categories. Number 1, evidence of 3-dimensional thinking and spatial understanding. Number 2, evidence of conceptual thinking and a design ambition. And number 3, evidence of a design resolution. Now, each of those has categories underneath. I'm not going to read through all of these. They're available on the website and they'll be available through a recording of this. But it's to say that what we're looking for is evidence of 3-dimensional thinking and spatial understanding. So that might mean looking at axonometrics, it might be 3D models, it might be seeing the complexity at which you work and how you represent that. Could be physical models, could be through sections and so forth. We want to understand that you can think 3-dimensionally and with a clear understanding of complex spatial relationships. Evidence of conceptual thinking and design ambition is really to see that you can think not just in a purely pragmatic or functionalist way, but you can think conceptually, that there are certain themes and concerns behind a design. And design ambition is about doing more than is just asked, not just doing something that's very competent, but is very clear what it is from the beginning. We want to see, we're interested in applications and candidates who have a certain ambition in what they want to achieve through architecture and architectural design. And we want to see evidence of design resolution. This means we want to see how something is completed. We want to see how it's taken to the end. We don't want to just see lots of starting parts, beginnings of projects, sort of diagrams that are starting to lead to something. We also want to see how it's completed. We want to see how it's resolved, how it's finished off, and how that's all understood. So here's some top 10 tips for building a good portfolio. And for this, we're using examples of other portfolios that we've received over the last number of semesters. So the cover, which is arguably one of the 2 most important pages of your portfolio. What does it hit us with? What's the first image that it hits us with? It needs to have obviously your name. It needs to say that it's a submission for the University of Melbourne. It wants to have a strong image. Could be one of the strongest images you have in your portfolio. Something that when we see it, we go, oh, this is interesting. Let's see what this is all about. Number 2 is an introduction where you can introduce yourself by name, photo, concise CV. This is one way to do it, where you give us some information about your background, you show us what skills you have and whether you have a very comprehensive knowledge of something like AutoCAD or Adobe Photoshop, or you just know it a little bit and such. Gives us some background. That's one way, but you don't have to do it this way. There's another, which is an introduction, which just shows us as a kind of contents page. And it just goes through and gives us the names and projects that you're going to be showing, and whether they're part of individual work, whether they were done as part of work experience, whether they were part of school, and what level within it. It could be that this is also a page where you give information on each of these projects, and in terms of whether it was done in school or professionally, and whether it was done as an individual or it was done as a group, and what part of that as a group you might have. Then when we start to get into the projects themselves, we want to see how the project has evolved. So again, this is an example of 2 pages. On the left-hand side, obviously, this is starting to talk about a project. It's getting to see a very strong image of what that project might be. On the right-hand side, on another page, we have the project in more detail and some written text. Again, but precise and concise written text. We don't need lots and lots of pages of text because we don't have time to read through everything. But we do want to understand what the project is. And this is also a perfect page in which, again, you can say this is group work, who it was done with, what role you had, what level of school this was done in. This one says it was a summer studio, year 3, semester 1. It was group work and the role and so forth. So this is the information we need, as well as obviously the drawings, the diagrams, and the text. It's important, as I said before, that you consider the portfolio a project in its own right. So that means you have to compose these pages. You have to make them good looking. You have to make them readable. There's a lot of information on both of these 2 pages here, but they're laid out in such a way that we can read it, we can see a lot of information, we can understand the project, and we can gain quickly an insight into the complexity of the project, the 3-dimensional quality, as I said before, as well as what the project is achieving. And it's also showing us a range of different techniques, axonometrics, exploded axonometrics, plans, sections, renderings, internal views, documentary evidence, research, and so forth. All of these are really useful for us to understand what a student has done and what experience and skills they've attained. Again, as it moves through, it can be different scales. So here, a kind of analytic drawing on the left-hand side, again, with some text and some information, something about the program, something about the site analysis and such. And then over on the right, a really beautiful, very highly rendered axonometric image, very good coloration to it, very clear line work in terms of the line weights, and more information. So we get, again, a sense also of that change of scale, that change of information, that change of ways of representing an architectural idea. And balance and showing structure and construction. So being able to go into more detail, being able to show prototyping, being able to show iterative processes, being able to show how an idea has developed and what's the sequence of steps through the process and how it came into being, and how that all demonstrates a kind of systems knowledge, as it were. Here, more to do with the interiors. So in terms of interior images, of renderings, of a sense of atmosphere, a sense of human habitation, having scale because there are people and chairs and furniture in the image. So something that gives us a good sense that you understand how a space can operate, how it's inhabited, and what are the kind of textures and materialities that go into that, as well as obviously the lighting and the sense of ambiance in the space. And going from the scale of the urban to complex typologies to material detail. So ranging back and forth from looking at large scale, possibly urban design plans and urban relationship, and into more detailed in terms of material details and such. And again, from urban to complex typologies to material details, having this really incredible image with a section so we can really understand what's happening in this train station and the retail components that go with it, and then a series of diagrams below to explain how the structural system worked and how it would be layered up as it's both as a construction process but also as a design process. Again, to those material details themselves, so really coming in close, looking at how something's attached, how a facade is made, how a certain material joins to another material, what the fasteners and the fixings might be, how that comes together, how it's both physically made in terms of clamps or clips or whatever the attachments might be, but also what it has to do with the overall conception of a project. We want to be able to understand the drawings really well. We want to be able to read the plans, to have some differentiation so we understand what floor plan, if it's a ground floor or the first floor or the third floor, as it were. Have that in relationship to a section so we can understand the context on the site and understand the topography and the complexity of the site. And then start to see, as the images on the left show, these internal views, again, giving a sense of ambience, of environment, and some sensibility of how they're inhabited. And then, they need to be complete to show something about the whole process of the project and how it's developed. Again, going through stages, showing how these different phases, 1, 2, 3, 3, 1, 3, 2, and how they have developed as part of that overall design development. Photography of models is really important. Obviously, we can't receive physical models, so we hope and we expect that people will make physical models, but they need to be photographed really well. It needs to be clear, well lit, to tell a story, to really give us the sensibility as if we were really there in the room with this object. Now, here are some of the things not to do, some of the things to don't do. First and foremost, even before you look at this image, is to remember you only have 20 pages in total. Please don't use a whole page just to say thank you at the end. Please don't use a whole page just to announce yourself. You have to really use the real estate of 20 pages in the most efficient way possible. So in that 20 pages, everything should go to telling the story of you as a designer and you and your work. Here, there's just too much information, all kinds of stuff laid on top of each other. It's almost impossible to read what the project is and to understand. There's just too much going on. So don't crowd the page with too much information. It's better to be sharp and clear than to just try to use up everything you've ever done on a project. Make sure that the things are working correctly. For instance, here, if you're using a precedent, you need to really give the information about where it came from. You need to give the original author the credit for the work that they've done. And you need to check things like spelling. We know that many of you will be coming into this with English as a second language or even a third language perhaps. But still, if you don't proofread, if you don't have some friend come and proofread and check the spelling, it'll be picked up and we'll notice it and it'll look like you just didn't put enough time and effort into the whole project. Here, there's, again, the images are not great. They're okay, but they're not great, but they're really spread out and it doesn't really help us to understand what the whole project might be. We get some sense of it, we get a sense of a development, but it's not really telling us enough to understand what the project was all about. In this image, the work's just not really particularly good. The quality of line work is bad. It looks like it's been copied over from something else. The lines are big and thick. There's too much information in terms of the text, but actually doesn't really tell us very much. And the drawings themselves are very small and don't really give us much information or background. A page full of a chart where we can't even read the word, so we have no idea of how this is helping or what this is giving us information on. Again, a rendering, it looks okay, the design might be okay, but there's just so much that's wrong with it. So if you look, the background is pixelated, the shadows don't really match with the image. There's clearly, this has been collaged together, and there's an issue of scale of things not lining up. There are questions about the scale of the project and how it's been inserted into this image of the site. And we understand that you may not have professional equipment to take photographs. You just have a phone, a camera phone. your phone with a camera that you're using, but you don't necessarily take a photograph in such a way that the background is distracting. We're seeing the tables and the chairs and the benches behind. There's not enough light to really cast any shadows on this object, so it's kind of washed out and everything. It's not really in focus very much, so it's been done in a haphazard way, and it doesn't really give us a sense that somebody's paid a great deal of attention. So do things. Do take really good photographs. Make sure they have strong, nice shadows so we can read the object. Make sure that the layout is clear and have this array of different techniques of plans, diagrams, models perhaps, and other images. Sections that go through that give us an understanding of the space as well as the diagrams and the form. Again, a lot of information here, but not too much text. It's not overridden by way too much text. Plans that are reasonable. They show us this build-up from first floor, second floor to third floor, the elevations, the master plan so we can see it on the site. A lot of really useful information in one page for one project. Some very complex projects showing how all of these bits and pieces come together. There's a lot of information in both of these images, but it's well detailed and it's well articulated and we can understand it. And finally, another image, just a very nice rendered image. It gives us a sense of scale, series of diagrams so we understand what was behind the design and how it came about, a location with the site plan as well. So those are the kind of things that really help us to understand and really help us to appreciate the project. Now, with your submission, you also have to make a personal statement, and these are the requirements. It should not exceed 500 words. It's about emphasizing the motivation for taking the program, what you understand about it, how you imagine your career and what you want to get out of a professional degree in architecture, and how it goes with other things. But make it a strong effort. This is really about you telling us why you really want to study architecture and why you want to do so at the University of Melbourne. The design portfolio has to be put up. You can refer again to the MSD design portfolio requirements and the MSD slide room web pages. They give a lot of information. A lot of the information I've given is also repeated there. So please look at these pages, study them carefully, and again, treat the project of a design portfolio as a project. It's not just an assemblage of stuff you happen to have done previously. It's a project in its own right. And these are some important updates. Portfolios will not be assessed under these criteria, and to maintain equity and quality, we cannot accept resubmissions of the same course for the same intake, cannot provide individual feedback on a portfolio, and cannot reassess a portfolio when once an outcome has been made. And these are the deadlines. So this is the final deadline for semester 2, 2020 coming up. Is Sunday, the 28th of June. And for semester 1, 2001, for international students, there's the date in October, and for domestic applicants, in November, at the end of November. Okay. Oops, sorry. Now I'm going to turn this over, and we're going to have a perspective from a current student at the Melbourne School of Design. So I'll turn this over to Nivedita.
Thank you so much, Donald. You've beaten me to it. Thank you, Nivedita. I just wanted to introduce you and hand over to you.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you, Donald. Good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here today. I'm Nivedita, a graduate student ambassador at the Melbourne School of Design, and I have a bachelor's degree in architecture, and I'm currently in the 3rd semester of my 2-year urban design master's program. So some of you might be wondering, what is urban design exactly? Next slide, please, Donald. Yeah, next. It is basically the process of giving form, function, and life to the spaces that we live, work, and play in. Next, please. It goes right across scales. The urban designers work with projects that involve the creation of a whole city, or even small things like furniture and street lighting. Next, please. It is often the combination or the meeting point of architecture, urban planning, and landscape design. Next, please. When I applied to MSD, my portfolio cover page looked like what you see on the left, with all the necessary details that are specified in the requirements. My current approach, as you see on the right, is a bit more minimalistic, reducing the heavy images while keeping all the relevant details. Make sure that you check the list of the details that are required and don't miss anything. You need to include your student ID as well as the number of years you have studied in your previous degree. Next, please. Next slide, please. So the CV and contents page, the CV and contents page, it basically defines the first impression that the selection committee gets of you, and try to avoid unprofessional photographs, stick to a plain background, and stick to a maximum of 2 to 3 font sizes throughout your whole portfolio. And that also applies to the font styles as well. Setting a color scheme for your portfolio is a good practice at this stage. You can also give a small introduction about your chosen projects along with which year you completed them in. As Donald mentioned, choose only the work that you're proud of. Quality definitely matters more than quantity here. Next, please. So each project must have a cover page or a title template of its own. This is to introduce each project separately. These are some examples of my work where you can see different ways to showcase these projects. And this is a good way to showcase your rendering and modeling skills right in the front page. So MSD requires some specific details for each project, including your level of involvement in any group project. So you have to mention what work exactly you did within that group project to help them assess your involvement. Next, please. Next. So the selection committee looks for a wide range of design thinking, and that includes conceptual stages all the way till the final drawings. Don't forget to add the process diagrams for your design. Keep it simple and easy to read with 2 to 3 words per caption. Here are some more examples of how you can show some diagrams. You can also show them in 3D with a small caption below it. And again, you can see I have kept the color scheme to a minimum of 2 colors, but maximum of 3 to 4. Next, please. Next slide. Finally, we come to the most popular way of showcasing design talents, full bleed renders. We all love to put those nice rendered photographs which you have made in Photoshop. Ensure that you choose images that you have personally worked on, especially if you're showing work from an internship and you're putting a render of the final project. Ensure that you have actually worked on that, and if not, please mention that as well. If it is a plan or a top view of an image, ensure that you include the scale and the north direction. And of course, don't forget the title of the image to give some context. I am a believer of the phrase that less is more, and you can see that you do not need too many colors to create a strong impact. And that's all from me, everyone. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Nivedita. It's really great and very generous of you to show us some insights into the work that you've done yourself. So now we're going to open the floor, I guess, for some questions and discussion. So before we get started, I know we've got a lot of people attending tonight and a lot of people asking questions in the chat room. So please, if we don't get to your questions, we have a group email address, which is msd-info@unimelb.edu.au. So please, if we don't cover any of the questions that you specifically want answered tonight, please make sure that you email us through your questions and my team will get back to you within 24 hours. So what I'm going to do is invite Nivedita and Don to join me back on screen, so I'm not sitting here by myself. Thank you. And we'll get into some questions. So Donald, maybe I'll start with you. Okay. And get your perspective from a question. Is it better to have a design style that's distinct, or better to have one that's more general and varied so that you see different design pieces in your portfolio?
Look, what's important are the projects and the work and the way in which they're presented. So almost, as Navidita was saying, she was talking about having a kind of minimalist style, not having a lot of colors, being very crisp lines, and really using the page to show stuff. Now that's a particular style, but at the same time, what's most important was the work itself and the kind of work that she was showing and choosing those images that are really strong. So a style will come across, but it's not so much about creating a style as really giving us information on the work. We're making our judgment on work that's already been produced. So what we want to understand are the projects themselves. So the style of graphic representation should evolve out of what does it take to explain and to convey the work that you've already done.
Nivedita, would you like to add anything? Well, I think we've got her on mute. There we go.
Sorry. So, for example, like people who don't have a design background and want to do a course that needs a portfolio might want to explore some styles that they can develop such kind of thinking through a portfolio in itself, and that can be their strong that stands out if their projects are not strong enough.
Great, thank you.
So in those cases, I would say that the style is important. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Next question that we got, and this is one that we get quite often from current students at the University of Melbourne in our undergraduate degrees too, who think that it's a bad thing to, well, they think that they can just pop the work that they've done in class into the portfolio, even if they're not 100% happy with it. But I think, Donald, you made it clear earlier that you need to put your best effort forward. We don't know what students have done in their undergraduate classes, so they're not constrained by what they've produced in class. They can make improvements on it before they put it into their portfolio, can't they?
Absolutely. And in fact, this was a point I was going to raise, that as I said before, the portfolio is a project. You've gained knowledge, you've gained understanding on any project you've already done. And that new knowledge that you've gained can help you go back and adjust, make better projects that you've already done. As long as you're doing the work, then that's the evidence we want to see. So if you did a project 1.5, 2 years ago, and it didn't quite have enough time to finish it the way you wanted to, or you didn't really know how to do the kind of rendering you were wanting to, if you know that now, then redo that project. Because at the end of the day, as long as it's your work, that's what we're seeing. So we want to see the best possible work that we can from you to understand what your talents and your abilities are. So just because you did it in school or even did it professionally some time ago, it doesn't have to stop there. When you submit the portfolio, that's when it stops, because that's when we'll look at it. But up to that time, you have all the license you need to make it better and better and make it the best possible example of what you're able to do.
Thanks, Don. Now, we've been getting quite a few questions from, I'm guessing, career changes around the 300-point architecture program, and specifically, what should they focus on in their portfolios if they're not specifically coming from a design background?
Yeah, so two things on this. One is that we fully understand that. That's the point of the program. It's been a great success, and some of our very best graduates have come through the 300-point program. Now, there is a criteria that in order to have a successful application, you have to show that, one, you've taken a history course, could be an architectural history, could be an art history, could be in cinema perhaps, but something that looks at the kind of cultural condition of an art practice or an architectural practice and so forth. But you also are expected to have taken a design studio. The reason for this is twofold. On the one hand, doing design is a different way than almost any other profession, because you're actually struggling not with the right answer, but many possible answers for a design. And so working in a design studio can be very frustrating for some people who have come from a background where there are correct answers for something. So we want people to have experienced working in a design studio, a course that they've taken someplace as part of the application. But having done that, that also offers you an opportunity to start to build a portfolio, because you will be doing design projects and you will be learning design techniques and representational techniques and such. So these are opportunities to put it together. But again, when we're looking at a 300-point portfolio application, we know full well that this person is only at the very beginning of their potential architectural career. So we're looking for how they see the world. It might be through photographs, it might be through sketching, it might be through collages, it might be something else they've worked on, like stage design or cinema or film or something that they've done. So we will put that together, but again, we need you to give us some sense of how you appreciate living in the world in terms of the environment, in terms of the built environment. It doesn't mean you have to take photographs of buildings. It could be about the way the light affects how it hits a wall, how it hits a brick wall of something. It could be the way the water reflects a certain image or something. So we're trying to see a certain sensibility in that. And so we look at that very different than those who come in for the 200-point degree who already have an undergraduate degree in architectural studies of some kind.
Thank you. Now we have a question that seems to be trending around what kind of scales should we use for our projects? Should it be standardized, or is it the page layout more important?
It's the page. I mean, in a certain way, these are electronic portfolios. They come to us as a PDF. In a certain sense, there is no scale. We won't be printing them out and looking at them at A3 or A4 or A2 or A1. We're going to be looking at them on the screen. So it's something that probably should have been said. I think it is said somewhere else. But you should make sure that all of your plans, sections, elevations, and axonometrics have a graphic scale. It doesn't really help us if you say 1 to 500, because we're just going to be seeing it on the screen. But if you have a graphic scale, then we know how big something is. When you have renderings and perspectives, having people in them, having furniture, chairs, tables, things like this, helps us to understand scale. When you're doing a large bird's eye perspective of the city, like in an urban design point of view, having cars, having people, having buses, these also give us a sense of scale. They're things that we understand and we relate to in terms of scale. So we expect, as I showed in the portfolios, we expect you to show details, so how something works, all the way up to a full building, all the way up to an urban precinct or something. So the scale of the projects can go from very small to very large, but we need something that gives us some indication of what something is in relationship to the human body.
Great, thank you. Now, I've got a question around technical programs to use. So perhaps, Nivedita, we can start with you with this one. In terms of putting your portfolio together, and also just in your studies now that you are an urban design student with us, what programs would you recommend to be the ones to learn to best prepare a great portfolio?
Sure. So there are specific tasks that need different programs. So for example, if you want to make things like diagrams that have really good quality, I would suggest Illustrator. And if you want to make things like, changing the sky behind a building or changing the color of the water, those kind of things require Photoshop. And again, a software called InDesign is what you use to put it all together and make a presentation. So basically, the whole Adobe suite is recommended. And that involves all the design stages, right from the conceptual to the render stage. These will help you. And it always helps to have some sort of 3D modeling technique in your skill set. An easy one, or something that even beginners can understand easily, is SketchUp. As well as in Melbourne and in the Australian context, the Revit software is quite well known here. And most of the companies require you to know that. And of course, the drafting and plans, sections, elevations, things like that are mostly drafted in AutoCAD. So these are the softwares that a basic design course student must have in their skill set. But again, you can always learn it at university as well.
And Donald, did you have any others that you would recommend?
Look, I think certainly the Adobe suite is very important. I mean, my favorite program is InDesign. I think you can do almost everything in InDesign. But a lot of work now takes place, particularly 3D modeling with Rhinoceros. And then you have plugins like Grasshopper and others that move into that. I mean, most of these things can be learned online very quickly now. And most of them also have very, very either free or very competitive prices for students. You can get a 3-month license for free, as it were, and learn these projects and use them. You know, many of you, if you've done an undergraduate degree, will already be working in some of these. But, you know, as was said, the basic ones are there in order to put together the portfolio and such. We're assuming that most of you are already working on projects and have already put together your projects. But for putting it together as a portfolio, certainly Photoshop, Illustrator, and then InDesign are really the best programs.
Thank you. Now we have had a couple of questions around creating a portfolio for in a professional context. So, you know, perhaps using what you're learning at undergrad and postgraduate level to create a really great professional portfolio to go out into industry. And I think hopefully you agree, John, a lot of what you've covered tonight really applies in that context as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, look, most of it covers. I mean, probably the difference is that we have quite specific requirements for the application to the Master of Architecture program, which really has to do with that sort of cover sheet as was shown. You know, we need to know what year, you know, this is an academic project. Was it in your first semester or your last semester? You know, semester 1 or semester 6 or semester 10, whatever it might be. What year it was done. Was it done last year or was it done 5 years ago? That's useful for us to understand, to know that it was academic work or it was professional work, and whether you did it as an individual or as part of a group. Now, sometimes for a portfolio where you're going to get a job, you wouldn't have to put necessarily all of that in, although it would be useful, and a lot of practices, you know, would want to know exactly those same things. So there's not a lot of difference between the two. It may be that, you know, if you were making a portfolio for a professional situation, you might show a bit more of building work, you know, in terms of documentation for something that's actually going to be built or that has been built or something like that. But the idea of really treating the portfolio not just as a collection of previous work that you picked up and assembled together quickly, but actually treating it as a project to show how much thought and intelligence has gone into it is very persuasive to an employer, to see that this is somebody that really cares about details. They make sure the punctuation and the spelling is correct. Everything's laid out nicely. They have a good sense of graphic space. That's the kind of person I would hire.
Yeah, great. Now we're coming up to the end. We've got 2 whole minutes left, so I thought I'd finish up with a question for you, Nivedita. You're, you know, very close to approaching the end of your studies with us now. You'll have almost just over 1 semester left. What are you planning on doing when you finish up with us? Will you be looking for, you know, getting that portfolio together and looking for jobs in Melbourne?
Yes, definitely. So job hunting in Melbourne during masters is an ongoing process. It's not just at the last semester. I'm looking forward to joining some practice that involves both my degrees in architecture and urban design, and hopefully that works out.
Fantastic. And Donald, I'll leave the last question for you. Actually, no, Nivedita, I'd like to hear your perspective on this too. A nice general question to end on, which hopefully isn't too tricky. Where do you get your design inspiration from?
Well, for me, look, it comes from working with lots of really smart people, and you pick it up. I mean, part of, you know, I mean, a portfolio in a way also shows you other ideas. And we often, in my practice, my office, we often go back to previous projects and rethink about them in a new context. So sometimes it's not so much recycling as it is rethinking a project, having gained some experience in between.
And Nivedita?
For me, so when I get a design brief, immediately what goes into my head is the user experience. So I would think of how I would want to feel in that space, especially what that would need, what I want that space to bring for me. And I try to base my design based on that. So the people's perspective is my starting point.
Fantastic. Lovely words to finish up on. I'd like to just conclude the evening by saying to Donald and to Nivedita, thank you so much for your time tonight. Your advice and expertise has been invaluable, and I hope that everyone who's attended has learned something new tonight. So thank you so much. And again, for our attendees, if you do have additional questions, please contact us on msd-info@unimel.edu.au. and our team will get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you so much, everyone. Good evening. Stay safe.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.